When you first launch the network monitor, you can press F10 to begin capturing network traffic and F11 to end the capture. Usually, a typical network traffic capture allows you to browse the content on individuals' data packets. You can configure two types of filters within the network monitor. There are a number of pre-configured filters, or you can create one or more to meet a specific requirement. The two type of filters that comes with the network monitor are the capture filter, that this one will capture only the specific network traffic that you specify, and the display filter, which will display only a specific type of traffic, allowing you to view a subset of traffic that was captured. The disk management console provides a central location for administering the physical hard disk and disk-based devices attached to the server. It displays a graphical view of your hard disk storage allocation along with the health of your disk subsystems. You can complete many tasks using the disk management console, which includes working with disk quotas, resizing hard drives, performing disk diagnostics, and configure volume shadow copies. In Windows Server 2008, a disk quota is simply a limit that is placed on the disk space a user is permitted to consume in a particular volume or folder. Quotas are based on the notation of file ownership. Windows automatically makes a user the owner of a file that he or she created on a server volume. The quota system tracks all of the files owned by each user and adds their sizes. When the total size of a given user's file reaches the quota specified by the user administrator, the system takes action and also specified by the administrator. When you install the File Services Server role, you have the option to install the File Server Resource Management role service. When you select this role service, Windows Server 2008 install the File Server Resource Management console. That it was first introduced in Windows Server 2003 R2, which provides tools that enable file server administrators to monitor and regulate their server storage. You can perform the following tasks: establish quotas that limits the amount of storage space allotted to each user, create screens that prevent users from storing a specific type of files on a server drive, create templates that simplify the process of applying quotas and screens, automatically send email messages to users and or administrators when quotas are exceeded or nearly to be exceeded, and generate reports providing details of users' storage activities. Using the FSRM, the action the system takes when a user approaches or reaches a quota are highly configurable. For example, administrator can configure quota to be hard or soft. A hard quota prohibits users from consuming any disk space beyond the allowed amount, while a soft quota allows the user storage space beyond the allowed amount and just send an email notification to the user and or administrators. Administrators can also specify the threshold, which indicates and dictates the percentage of available disk space at which the system should send notifications, and configures the quota server to generate event log entries and reports in response to the quota threshold. For enterprise networks, creating quota templates is a recommended method for managing quota assignment on a large scale. A quota template is a collection of settings that defines a number of configuration items for these quotas, because it is a template. Because it is a template also, this collection of settings can be used to create numerous quota assignments, all containing consistent configuration settings. A quota template is a collection of settings that defines whether a quota should be hard or soft, what threshold FSRM should apply to the quota, and what action FSRM should take when a user reaches the threshold. The File Server Manager console includes several predefined templates, which you can use to create your own template. But you also can create your own template by using the File Server Resource Management console. CUDAs are also available on NTFS volumes without installing the File Service Resource Management role services. But these NTFS CUDAs are limited to controlling storage on entire volumes or a per user basis. When you create the FSRM CUDAs for volumes or folders, however, they apply to all users. NTFS CUDAs are also limited to creating event logs entries only, while the FSRM CUDAs can also send email notification, execute commands, and generate reports as well as log events. On NTFS, this is done through the CUDA tab located in the Properties dialog box of each disk volume. By default, these CUDAs are disabled because this feature requires system resources to run and maintain. It is recommended that you enable these CUDAs only on network drivers or local drivers containing user data and not system drivers where Windows Server 2008 is installed. After you enable these CUDAs, you have a number of options. In the most basic setup, you can choose to gather data to gauge space usage and find users who are maintaining large amount of space. The other option is to regulate disk space. This is really helpful if you need to closely manage the amount of space you have on your own volume. These settings affects all users accessing the volume. A user's quota amount is measured by totaling all the files that users owns on a volume. And finally, we're going to talk about volume shadow copy service. Shadow copies of shared folders is a Windows Server 2008 mechanism that automatically retains copies of files on server's volume in multiple versions from the specific points in time. When users accidentally overwrite or delete files, they can access the shadow copies to restore earlier versions. This feature is designed to prevent administrators from having to load backup media to restore individual files for users. Shadow copy is a file-based fault tolerance mechanism that does not provide protection against disk failure, but it does protect against accidental file deletion that inconvenience users and administrators on a regular basis. Shadow copies of shared folders create point-in-time copies of files that are stored on file shares on Windows Server 2008 file servers. Using shadow copies of shared folders allows users to access previous versions of files without requiring administrator intervention. Shadow copies of shared folders uses the Volume Shadow Copy Service, or VSS. Shadow copies of shared folders functionality is enabled at the volume level, which means that it will be enabled or disabled from all of the shared folders on the C drives. Shadow copies of shared folders work by periodically taking a snapshot of the content of all of the shared folder on a particular volume and storing those snapshots to allow users and administrators to refer back to them later for any of the purposes described. The client software required to use shadow copies of shared folder is built into Windows XP Service Pack 2 and later, Windows Vista, Windows 7, and Windows Server 2008. The necessary software for previous operating system can also be downloaded from the Microsoft website. Before configuring the shadow copies, you must formulate a plan for where the shadow copies will be stored and how much space will be allocated to storing those shadow copies. You must allocate a minimum of 300 megabytes of space to store shadow copies. The default values for shadow copy storage is 10% of the source volume. You can configure shadow copies of shared folders to store snapshots. This is on the same volume as the files being copied, or else you can store the shadow copies on a separate volume. When streaming a storage requirement for shadow copies of shared folders, keep in mind that files that change frequently will have higher snapshot storage requirement than those files that do not change often. It is important to allocate sufficient disk space to support your shadow copies of shared folders deployment, since when this storage limit is reached, older versions of shadow copies will be deleted without any means of restoring them. Additionally, if you need to move your shadow copies storage from one volume to another, you will need to delete any shadow copies that were stored on the original volume and must start from scratch on the new volume. With the BSS, you can set up manual or automatic backups of the shadow copies. This allows you to implement a file restore strategy where users can restore their own files from previous version right from the user desktop, as we explained before. BSS is configured at the volume level but is disabled by default. Using the settings on the Shadow Copies tab, you can manually create a new snapshot and view all of the available snapshots on the system. BSS stores up to 64 shadow copies of selected volume, as long as there is enough disk space on the storage to store BSS backup. Access shadow copies settings change the size of the storage area used by BSS and customize the schedule for automatic snapshot can be done from the settings of the volume. Similar to other processes in Windows Server 2008, you can administer the BSS from the command line using the BSS admin utility. Restoring files and folders with the volume shadow copy is very straightforward on Windows Server 2008 and Windows 7. The client-side service that is needed to view the previous version is part of the operating system. To view the previous version of a folder, browse the file in the Windows Explorer, right-click the folder, and then click the Properties to open the Property dialog box for the folder. The Previous Version tab displays all available shadow copy versions on the server. Well, students, this is all that we have to learn in this class. I really appreciate your time. I hope that you enjoyed the class as much as I did. We are not going to talk about the part of backing the server because we actually talked quite a lot during the semester. But you are more than welcome to read it in the book if you want to review some of the concepts for the final. Good luck, and I hope to see you soon again.